Oh, okay. Now I'll go back to the share screen. It's a lot of steps here. There we go. All right. So this is all about how do we manage this sort of crisis that we're in, that we find ourselves in. And so in order to have the discussion, I'm trying to make a commitment to having really clear definitions of what's our target, what's our objective here as a board, and how does that, and so without that, we can't really have conversations about how to be helpful. So we'll talk about where I think most of this is all a synthesization of conversations with the leadership team. And I want to make sure we focus on the right stuff and that we develop and that we're evaluating the right metrics. And that again, that we're data driven, and that'll help us keep focused, keep on the same page. And then as we move into planning, that we synthesize all the data. I think for a project of this scale, I mean, it's not even a project yet, but a conversation of this scale, I also think we have to have flexibility and creativity along with all that, the data. And I also just want to acknowledge, especially when we move into the planning phase, this is a leap of faith. Like there's so many unknowns in our ecosystem right now, but I think you all know that this team operates from a place of intelligence and heart. But at the end of the day, pretty much everything we do is a leap of faith. And so I also wanted to step back and make sure that we all have a comfort zone. And I want you all to test the conversations we have, that we aren't, as me as CEO or our leadership team or as a board, that we are still operating within the context of our strategic plan. And as I've started thinking about this and revisiting the strategic plan, I've been pretty impressed that even in this major crisis, the things that I think pull us out are all embedded in the strategic plan. So, but that's our test, right? We are in a bit of a crisis, and so we do need to be creative, and things that might not have been identified in the strategic plan might show up. But I think for the most part, that's one of our goals, is to keep checking back on our strategy. And I think in the next few minutes, you're gonna, and I have this exact same slide again a little bit later. I think we're really well embedded in this strategic plan. And I just think that's important to say because of the whole leap of faith. So it is a leap of faith, but this is a well-informed plan. The strategic plan is, and even though we don't know kind of what's next, this will continue to be our light, our guiding light. And so one of the hardest things that I've been, or the thing I've been struggling with the most from last board meeting to this, is how to have a conversation with the board and what your role in this is. And I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but just as a placeholder mentally, I think moving forward, there's three primary roles that, or functions, maybe it's not even role, functions that the board can have. I think moving forward, and that's fund development, the property analysis. We talked a little bit last Friday of sort of what our situation is with our properties, and so I'll kind of cover that briefly in a few minutes. And then advocacy. Again, most of those things are in our strategic plan already. We just haven't really implemented a full-on sort of full court press on this. And so some of the conversations that I've had, for instance, with Jeremy, are in, kind of get into the operational aspects of the organization. And I just don't think, while the board would have some insight and some wisdom there, I think that's not efficient, and in a lot of cases, probably not even appropriate, because, so for instance, if Paula, Julie, and I have a conversation about, hey, at some point we might need to think about even temporarily moving the detox unit into DeKoski Hall, that conversation is a complex conversation because it talks about that licensing, that talks about credentials, that talks about the staffing and fines, and we just can't go there with the board, even though would be a huge decision. And I'm just making that up as an example, right? Like as if we start talking about consolidating, there's just so much complexity to what we do operationally that to bring the board into that, even though I think that was a little bit of my impulse, and I think a little bit of at least the board members that have reached out to me, a little bit of their impulse too. For instance, asking about billing efficiencies and that sort of thing. And so that's going to be one of those tensions that I think I just want to keep an eye on. But I'm at least as a mental push pin, I'm saying that these are kind of the three things that I think that we think about moving forward as board. Hey Dave, I'm just going to give you a heads up to when I get to the I'm going to ask you to talk about the detox profit and loss statement that you sent me just when we get to there. And so part of the reason that I'm having a hard time talking about, or not talking about, but organizing a way to talk about what's currently happening is because we're in crisis. And that is, in a lot of ways, and I think Paula said this today in a conversation, COVID has really exploited our weaknesses as an organization. And those are long-term considerations. So we are in crisis. And so I think that's motivating us to have longer-term conversations. But I don't want long-term conversations to be only driven on crisis. So it's a little bit of a tension. And that's why I just sort of put a graphic here to help to give a visual to that. Like that crisis wheel is spinning, y'all. The long-term is, I mean, we've got implications, and there's an interplay there for sure. But I just want, to just sort of point that out. And I think one way to distinguish that too, and I think I say it on a slide in a minute, is the crisis work is just got to be us, the staff, and the long-term visioning and planning. To like Jeremy's point of how do we exist 100 years from now, 10 years from now, even next year, that's board conversation. And so part of the leap of faith is that you all trust that we're going to navigate the crisis and stabilize that enough that we can be a stronger organization if we do some of this planning. And so that's kind of how I see it. And I think there's room for conversation in there, but that's how I'm needing to organize it in my mind. And knowing that some of the things we're talking about are not, not short-term fixes. So with that sort of in mind, this is not an exhaustive list at all, but I'm trying to make some distinctions between the current sort of concerns and future, meaning sort of the longer term concerns. And these current issues are mostly things that I've talked about in previous meetings. The fee-for-service model is challenging for us. Our occupancy is down 20% or so since COVID hit. At the same time that our expenses are relatively fixed. So that's a bit of a challenge. We have no ability to scale down, right? I think I've tried to articulate that in the past. So go ahead, Dave.
Can you hit the continue button so that we can see the whole, what's on the screen?
Oh, you're not seeing the screen?
No, it shows the continue.
I'm seeing the full screen.
Really?
Yeah, I see it as well.
Yes.
I'm seeing the whole screen.
So am
Chris,
I.
yeah,
Oh,
back
maybe-
to that.
Continue.
I don't, is there anybody besides Dave that's not seeing my screen right now? It says
I'm
framing the
seeing your
concern.
screen, but it's covered up because
Click continue.
Who?
Dave,
Dave,
You have to give permission when they start recording that you're agreeable to it.
Oh, okay. Are you there now, Dave?
thank you.
Okay.
hey Chris, your last slide that you were just on with the two wheels, I think it's really important that you talked about, managing the crisis and the operations. And I think what's so important is that whatever decisions are made in the crisis is that the board is, because again, the board would be responsible for the long-term strategy, talking about being around for 100 years and understanding the downstream impact potentially from that crisis mode. I think you teed it up perfectly, exactly like what should be managed, or what the board's kind of impact is, or what the board should essentially not sign off on. Anything that happens in the crisis is all operational. It's just, hey, by doing this, you understand that this has an impact in the long term, and just making sure that,
Right.
yep, board check, and then move on. So I thought you teed it up perfectly. I just want to
Thanks.
say I
And that's,
appreciate
that's
that.
what I'm trying to do, because I'm just trying to I'm trying to figure out how to manage this crisis, meaning how do we talk about the short term and also the long term, and sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't. So anyway, so thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
So back to the framing the concerns, again, these are, our properties are old, they're spread out all over town. I can get into why, but we can't accept private insurance in our current, well, the easiest, because we don't have enough medical staff in our residential facilities, so we can't provide private insurance coverage. We're mostly underfunded and we're over reliant on the Medicaid system, which is underfunded and broken. So the future concerns, meaning so that's kind of what we're swimming in. So what I think about post-crisis is that we still have incredible inefficiencies in this organization. And I don't really know how to quantify that, and that's not, but I'm said upwards of 10% of inefficiencies when we just talk about redundant staffing, food services. I think Paula, for instance, said today we spend $500 a week just on detox, our shipped order from detox. Did I get that right, Paula? Right, just as a for instance, because we don't have any economy of scale because we're doing 3 different operations essentially in these programs. We have more vehicles than we need. We have more overhead and programming. Our margins were slim prior to COVID and just barely sustainable. And now that our world's changed, I don't know how that looks. I also think there's a shift from residential care to outpatient and community-based services. We've been advocating for this for years to say, look, we need to do more to keep people out of that level of care. And I think there's going to be a move to that. I think residential care is always going to have its place, but I think there's more opportunities. And then my last bullet point under future concerns is, again, as I want to frame it all in the context of our strategic plan, I also want to just remind us of our mission. And I think it's beautifully timely and poignant right now. So our mission is to promote the overall health, wellness, and recovery of individuals impacted by substance use and behavioral health issues by meeting the needs of our clients and community. And so when I think about overall health, wellness, and recovery, I think we're in our current sort of state, we're falling short of what I think this particular mission statement was about when we created it, was more about community health, and quite frankly, less about the term addiction and more about mental wellness. And so that's a little bit of a nod, which I don't even have that discussion in here today. But I think that's a nod to one of those things that we have to talk about is the name of the agency. And this seemed like the timely place to do it since if we're gonna potentially blow some stuff up. So then I also want to just put it in a context of service lines. So again, my job today, I think, is to try and make sense for the board on how to think about what's happening. And so these are just some bullet points that I hope can, and I tried to be to kind of boil it to essence for folks, that detox is 24% of the agency. So right now, and it historically has the highest margins for us, right? So when I say 24%, that's kind of where our expenses and revenues lie. Referrals are mostly from previous stays, from NMRE, from community, et cetera. And that 10 beds, or about 70%, is kind of the break even. And so that's all a little bit relevant in a minute. Residential is a much larger part of the agency, almost 50% of where we're putting our resources. And historically, that's about a break even. So when we think about, and I'm speaking in generalities, it's about a break even. As we think about contracting or expanding programs, I think that's an important piece of what are the margins in these different programs. And so I'm just trying to speak in generalities. But what's interesting about them is that 70% of, or about, are referred from detox. So in other words, most of the folks that end up in our residential program have had a touch in detox first. And 22 beds, I'm sorry, and that's only for DeKoski, but it's still about 80% is break even for both programs. I'm not sure where the Phoenix number went, but that's, really almost, I think theirs is 10 and a half beds. And I just, for the sake of this conversation, I lumped OP and recovery homes together. And actually programmatically, we're doing that as an organization in terms of our org chart. Just making that decision earlier this week that the outpatient supervisor is going to supervise recovery homes. But anyway, so that's 11% of the agency, and they're historically slightly in the red. And so 11% is 8% outpatient, 3% recovery homes. So and the clients are largely fed from other services areas such as detox and residential. And relative to outpatient, it's really hard to talk about break even there for so many reasons. There's a metric that we can put there, but it's changed so much even just in the last few months that it's hard to talk about that. So again, I think the takeaway for me is detox is a quarter of the agency, residential is a half, and so that's 3/4 of the agency in just those two service lines. So I want to break that down just a little bit more. And this was an ask of Jeremy, a little bit of, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I've put it here, is what happens if we take those service lines and expand them, if we do nothing, and or if we close or constrict them. And so relative to detox, essentially, as the detox census goes, so does residential. In other words, that's who feeds residential. So not having detox, besides the impact on the community, has a pretty significant impact on the organization. We think mobile detox could be a new frontier, especially for private insurance and for NMRE. NMRE said, if you can follow the Blue Cross Blue Shield protocols for mobile detox, we'll fund that all day long. I also think there's some opportunities in expansion with the new crisis center. But whether detox, if we build it, will they come? It's hard to know right now what the need is. It's such unprecedented times. If we did nothing with detox, then it's not sustainable. I mean, that's the takeaway. And then again, we've got this pesky air conditioner that we got to put, I think it was $60K into. And so, and if we did nothing, we'd really be always holding our breath on census. And let's be frank, that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, is as detox goes, everything else does. And then the impact if we were to close it is just devastating. So I'll just leave. So essentially, I'm trying to get a context of in these service lines. Well, let me jump to the next one. Residential, there's probably room for expansion there, especially when we think about commercial insurance. There's potentially, and this is I'm talking about an expansion now, right? So if there was an expansion there, could we talk about some mixed use? So like, does everybody that lives at DeKoski have to be in services there, or can that be housing for some IOP work, for instance, or or a part of it be recovery housing or something? So there might be some expansion, but and that would be a feeder for outpatient. So if we expand in residential in this scenario, then it impacts positively outpatient. If we do nothing, we probably are maintaining those programs. We still have a lot of upkeep in them. So operationally, we can survive, but we'll continue to Band-Aid the facilities for sure. And then if we close, again, outpatient is devastated. And then, and actually it wouldn't have an impact on our revenue picture outside as it's a standalone. So again, I'm just trying to answer like what happens with these service lines if because that's, I think at least the vibe I got in talking to a couple board members is, well, let's talk about what's important to us and what isn't. And maybe we cut some things, maybe we make them things smaller. And so again, in outpatient recovery homes, here's that same matrix. I think there's huge opportunities in outpatient and huge opportunities in recovery home. Again, the context is that this is a much smaller part of our organization, however, right? So even if we doubled our recovery homes and they're operating in the black, that only slightly helps us in the big picture, if that makes sense. If we did nothing, we're in the same boat as our residential programs. Well, back to the expansion, again, that almost all of our recovery home folks are in outpatient or OHH for the clinic. Meaning that's referral sources. And if we do nothing, we're still vulnerable with our tax exempt status. I'll have to update you guys at the next meeting on that. It's been a continued nightmare. And it's really cost neutral. So, but again, the upkeep is still not good. And by closing them, that would have more of an impact on outpatient and OHH services. And housing continue to be a primary barrier for clients coming out of residential services. So in other words, we could close our recovery home, sell those properties. But I think from a long-term perspective, I don't think there's benefit to that. I'm going to try and throttle myself. I don't want to get ahead and sort of make my own suggestions, but I guess that's partly what I'm queuing up. So I want to just name some assumptions too. That despite some issues with billing and payments, that's not our primary focus of how to sort of get ourselves out of the current situation. Begging NMRE for more funds will help in the short term. In fact, we're counting on it. And I think they are going to respond in the short term. But it keeps us beholden and it doesn't really affect our, again, overall operations. My assumption, and that's why I just spent a little time on the last 3 slides. I don't think there's a service line that makes any sense to reduce. And I'm trying to speak from a place of not from heart or, but really from financially, I don't see that we're going to have a big impact. We can do some more analysis of that, but if you look at, what happens up and downstream for any particular service line, the impact it has on other service lines are counterproductive. I hope. Let me know if that concept doesn't make sense, but, and then, on the reverse of that, I think there's opportunities that exist for service line expansion. I think we've talked in the past about the 2.5, for instance. I think that could be significant. I mentioned mobile unit or mobile detox. I think a significant opportunity. And then my last assumption, which I already mentioned, but and thank Jeremy for the support. But it's also helping me have conversations with our staff, our leadership team, and with the board, and is that the operational crisis is the work of the staff, and the intermediate and long-term planning is the work of the board. And I don't want to oversimplify it or overcomplicate it, but the operational work of this agency is really complicated. And it's just, there's just not an opportunity that makes sense for the board to get involved in that. But that's why we have folks like Paul and Mark and Dave in the seats that they're in. So one of the other questions from the board member or that we said we talk about is kind of, when is D-Day? And I had a hard time figuring out how to think about that, and so Dave came up with this, and so hopefully this makes sense. Currently we have about 400K in the bank. That equals 3 months of payroll. That doesn't count our payables, so that means 3 months of payroll but not paying vendors. And so a comfort level would be to have at least 500K in the bank. I mean, we want more than that, but that's where we're feeling a little bit, less in crisis. The heartburn level is under 300K, and the crisis level is under 100K because we're not even meeting payroll. And so this is the timeline under our current, we've been losing 38K a month since this kicked off. And at that pace, because we're still bringing in revenue, but at that pace, we're at the heartburn level in just a couple of months, and we're at crisis level by March. So any questions on that? Because I think at the end of the day, this is probably the most important slide for the board to understand. And Dave, do you want to say any more about this? Or any questions?
I think you explained it very well. I looked at the last 6 months, and that was our average loss per month. We had a very good June where, we didn't lose any money in June. All of our facilities census were increased. Detox was up to like 69%. Had been running in the 50s, low 50s. And then July hit and it went right back. So
Right.
it was like this June, it was like, hey, I think we're breaking through, but July we're back to where we were at. So I can't predict another June.
So this is the trajectory we're currently on.
Yep.
Any board questions there? Okay.
No, I think that's great, Chris. I think it's important to know, without assumption, kind of like on the current trajectory where it's at. And then obviously that changes, right? I mean, we don't know what August looks like or what September looks like because they haven't happened yet. But then as they change, how does that date change?
Right.
And as adjustments are made, how does that change? But I think having those levels was really helpful, and I think just having it kind of visual so everyone can kind of see you know, where our target dates are, so.
Right.
Yeah, and it was almost like everybody released in June, COVID
Right. Right.
over. We can take off our masks, we can do this stuff. And then in July, we had the 4th of July, and then the Delta variant came out, and now, I mean, I don't know if that's how much of a factor that is, but I'm sure it's some
Right.
factor of it.
Right. So the takeaway, thanks, Dave. The takeaway from this slide is just that our change in revenues from NMRE are about 12%. So there's, and again, to repeat, our costs are pretty fixed. And so you know that we can't scale down. And so even if we get some increase from NMRE, it's not going to be 12%. So that's why one of the crisis management things we're doing is asking for an increase specifically in detox. Because here's the profit loss for detox. And Dave, you want to? I mean, I guess it's pretty self-explanatory, but
Yeah, I mean, the former CFO, I think you guys know him, Larry. The model that they were running on for many years, he had been there many years, and detox supported the rest of the operation because detox was running at a capacity of, you know, close to 80, and it was making a 30% or a $30,000 profit per month. And what started happening when the COVID and I started is that the census went down in the 50s. And so then we're losing 30, 40,000 a month in the detox unit. So we don't know if that's ever going to come back
right.
as the driver in this model, because the model that of detox being the driver, if it isn't the driver, we need to find out. We can't afford a $30,000 a month loss in detox when the rest of the system is break even or a loss.
Right. So another way to say that is that we've allowed other programmatic efficiencies or inefficiencies to exist because we had a detox unit that supported that. And for a number of reasons that we can have a conversation about that, but we don't think detox is coming back to the level that it was in the current, to the level that it was. I think there's things we can do to increase census and volume to some degree, but there's no I don't think there's much faith from us on the ground here that the detox is ever going to be what it was prior. And there's kind of, again, multiple reasons for that. And so part of the conversation, again, we've already sort of talked about it, is property consolidation. And that, I mean, I guess I'm not being shy about that. I think it's the time to start thinking about that. And so the first part of that conversation is just getting an overall assessment of that. And so here's my attempt at that, of laying out all of our properties the approximate value. Now, these are just Zillow values, right? Like we haven't had them appraised, but these are about what we think. And then if we have a mortgage on any of them, they show up there. So a couple quick notes, Phoenix East in the west, I'm sorry, in the third line down, that's that whole, you know, the state, we think it's valued at about 800, maybe more. We still owe 4 something on it, but the state is paying that note, so we're not actually paying it. But if we were to, but we are allowed to liquidate it. Anyway, so that's a little anomaly. That's why it's got the asterisk down there. So the takeaway from this is, if you segregate, again, recovery homes from treatment, well, let me just start with treatment. The very last line, treatment centers being DeCoste, Phoenix, and the Pier are assets we own in the range of $3 million. So if we go down that road, it makes sense that those 3 would be the 3 that were under a roof. I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself, and allows, because I said earlier, having medical presence in residential allows commercial insurance. So we've got an opportunity with that kind of leverage. I mean that it is what it is. However we move forward, that's the takeaway. Relative to all of our recovery homes, you know, we're looking at 1.5-ish that we have there. So in other words, if we liquidated all of our recovery homes to build an apartment complex that house the same amount of people, if that's what we felt like we wanted to do, then that's our starting line is that 1.5. So so this, I know this was an important piece for folks, and again, I use mostly round numbers, but is this graphic clear? Okay.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks.
So, you know, I think we said this at an earlier board meeting. For an agency in crisis, we have a lot to be thankful for in this scenario. And, you know, not that anybody's suggesting that we go sell 2 recovery homes to get us to our non-heartburn level cash in hand. That's not being suggested, but it's nice to know that we have some assets to leverage at the point that it makes sense to do. So now comes the, you know, the planning piece of it. Again, I go back to the strategic plan. And so what I try to do is sort of lay out the issues, and they're everything that we've named in our strategic plan. Our financial business practices are not efficient. And that's strategy number 2. Like, we need to tend to that. The opportunity to do some work in the community in a different way is significant in moving forward. And, you know, strategy 4 was to develop a model to reach more people with more services. That's the kind of conversation we can have, even though we're in crisis. How can we meet more people by restructuring the organization? And I feel completely hopeful that that's the case. Not even hopeful, I'm confident of that. And then advocacy just has to be a part of that. There's some, you know, there's just some dumb systems things that get in our way. So it all comes back to the strategic plan to me. And I think that's what was giving me some angst in the last, actually even couple of months, until I jumped back into the strategic plan. And this is the work. This is, the crisis has just sort of propelled us to this conversation, and COVID has exposed us, but this is the work we should have been doing. I don't mean that in a should have, I mean, this is the work that we charged ourselves with doing a number of months ago. So again, going back to this same slide, I think the conversation relative to the board is fund development, And including these things, feasibility study, meaning if we were to go to the community, how much given, I mean, there's people that know that, right? They know if we spend, it's gonna take us 6 months to raise X amount of money. Or, you can only, probably this community this size raise $2 million for a project, a building project or something like that. So potentially a team that looks at that. And then the whole property analysis, that's a little bit daunting of the kind of the hows and the wheres and where are the risk factors, zoning, all that kind of stuff that gets a little overwhelming. And then again, the advocacy, which is, I think, kind of ongoing, and we've had a little bit of starts and stops with some of that work. So what I'm trying to do is sort of frame it for the board to say, because I know you want to know how to help the situation at hand. And that's why we decided to, okay, let's meet. But I think I tried to frame it in a way to say, I think we manage our crisis. I think you've got a team that can do that. We can get us within a handful of months to a place that is at least puts a tourniquet on the bleeding. But we have to have strategic conversations about what we look like moving forward. So that's how I'm trying to frame the conversation. I don't know if that's helpful or what questions are there, but I think that's the direction that we go, is start making some decisions. I don't think there's any vote, but that checking your temperature as a board to have a conversation around, is it time to do something different with our properties? At the end of the day, all that is happening, every conversation I've had with Paula, with Julie, with Dave, it keeps coming back to our properties. It keeps coming back to how our constant struggle is providing good care in properties that are not serving us well financially or programmatically. They're lovely, some of them, but it keeps coming back to that. I don't think there's that much, now that I've had a chance to sort of try and get my head around it, there is work to do with advocating for rate increases or whatever, but I think we remain really vulnerable moving forward if we don't do something different. So that's
Chris,
how
this is Jessica. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I have to hop off,
Yeah.
but I wanted to say thank you. That is exactly what I needed to see and hear to wrap my arms around
Okay.
the current state. So I feel much, much more informed and understand more about what you guys are dealing with.
Okay.
So thank you very much for putting it together like that. That makes a
Thanks,
lot of sense
Jessica.
to me. And
And
I'm
if you
sorry I
wanna
have to leave
follow-
early.
Yep, that's great. I appreciate it. If you want to follow up, feel free to reach out.
For sure, I will. And
Okay.
yeah, keep me in the loop on whenever we'll get together again to talk, because want to stay involved for sure.
Great. Okay, great.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank
Jess.
you.
Hey, Mark. Chris?
Yeah, Chris, I agree with what Jessica said. Thank you. That was a lot of facts and well presented. Two things that I thought about while we were going through that, being involved in the court system. We're putting people in jail because we can't find housing for them. We're keeping people in jail because we detox them there. Because when somebody is out on bond and they're doing drugs or they're getting drunk, they get arrested, and we can't find a place to detox them, so they detox in jail. I don't know if that's something that we can find a way to work with the court system in the jail so that we can, I mean, it sounds like it's going to be problematic because we want those people, in a secure facility, but I would guess that there's a portion of them that the courts would rather send them to detox
Yeah.
when detox is needed.
One conversation I am having with the county right now is about well, you know, they keep getting all the news about the care that they're giving. It was front page on Sunday again. So I did reach out. So we are in some conversations about figuring out how to offer up our expertise. So I hear you. Any other thoughts?
I have a question, Chris.
Yeah, Jessica.
And these are just random things I wrote down, but why not build out detox to take private insurance? Why just build out the mobile unit? Or is there a way to combine them two so they're both built out?
Yes, so thanks. That is a point of clarification. I if we had more medical oversight at Detox, we could see more private insurance. So in the model that at least is dancing in my head, if the residential programs and Detox are under the same roof, that's all of residential services that we'd be able to have private insurance for, because our Julie would be there, Dr. Plum would be there, and folks would have access to that, because it's all for private insurance. It's all about medical necessity.
Okay.
And it's good for our, you know, and we see them, like, you know, Julie's been at Detox providing services, but she's, you know, has to stop being at the clinic to run over there. And so there's those kinds of efficiencies. But yes, that's an important point of clarification. I think there is room to expand in Detox into more private insurance. Paula, is that fair assessment? Sorry, right when you're taking a drink.
Is that something that NMRE would support? I know you said they would get behind you if you had a mobile detox unit, if you told them that you were gonna, I mean, I know that wouldn't be their funding because it's private insurance that we're doing it for, but would they get behind that in Detox as well?
Oh, go ahead, Paula.
Sorry, no. I think that they would get behind both.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think they don't want to necessarily lose a detox, you know, the detox facility, whatever, you know, however we call it, if, you know, whatever level of care through ASAM we call it. I know they don't want to lose that, especially, you know, we are the regional detox facility for the North. And that's why it would be such a horrible thing, a crisis, if we were to shut down. That being said, I think part of it is coming into terms with, are we really, when we were servicing the number that we were servicing of at a 3.7, I
Which
don't
means
know.
more medically compromised folks.
Thank you. So more medically compromised folks. I don't think we truly were meeting that threshold. From what I've looked at, I think from what Julie's looked at, I think that as we've gotten more staff in there who are better educated on what those scores actually mean, I think that the expansion would make more sense for Detox and a mobile Detox at a lower level of care, which would require less medical staffing.
We just think the model has to change there.
Yeah.
The medically, we'll still probably be able to serve medically compromised folks in the near future, but we were probably admitting folks that didn't meet that criteria. But that's because that's all we had. We weren't really able to fluctuate, because we were a standalone facility, fluctuate between levels of care. You kind of had to be one or the other. And so we were saying no to some, yes to others. And then if we reverse course, then it's yes to you, but no to you. And so a different sort of facility embedded differently, we could take folks and they can detox right in the same bed that they're going to stay in residential in, or, you know, I mean, it just gives us just some amazing flexibility that we just don't have now moving forward. But yes, I think Detox expansion is feasible.
And with the idea of the mobile Detox, so outpatient ambulatory detox is a very, for lack of a better way to say, hot thing for private
Right.
insurance right now. They don't want They
Mhm.
want to keep people in the community, and, you know, if you can detox at your home and come to a facility to get your medication during the day, almost like we see with the methadone clinics, that's the direction that they're looking to go. Where that mobile unit would come into play would be circumstances such as that, of opening the private insurance and really, and NIMRI they'll jump right on that, you know, like they'll,
Yeah,
I mean, if the privates are doing, that's what they basically said in one of the meetings. So that's why that expansion would be, it will be beneficial when we get there.
No, just a couple other questions. What does the medical presence look like for residential? I mean, I know we're already challenged finding nurses as it is. Is that something that is feasible in the
It-
future or in the next year, just because of the medical crisis, not finding help?
it creates, so here's what happens. We have a medical staff at DeKoski, part-time at Phoenix, and then all the nurses at Detox. If we're under one roof, job functions can change. So it actually, we need less nursing staff. But the most important criteria there is access to a PA, an NP, or an MD.
Mhm.
And we have we have 3 in our agency but we don't really have a way for any of them to be in the residential programs on an ongoing basis when it's only one Blue Cross Blue Shield person here or there. We just don't have an economy of scale there. But as we're able to build that out, then we'll be able to do that and have some efficiencies.
And just one other point, is there, and this might be getting ahead of things, but has there been a talk about like with consolidation, because we do own those properties on 8th Street that are continuous lots, that, you know, kind of leveraging what we already have as far as the investment in the property, and that, I don't know if the city would allow it, but that seems to me something to pursue as far as a location to build something bigger, because we already own 2 lots and it's zoned commercial.
Right, I mean, so to build something on a lot that we already own.
Yes.
Yeah, right, and that's the next level conversation for sure. And actually Paul and I, so one of the things Paul and I do is we just brainstorm crazy stuff and we just stay comfortable with that because it's just kind of how we process. But that was a thing I mean, well, you heard Dave trying to build, treatment center right out here in the front of the 1010 here. So that might be, something, but yeah, I mean, especially the footprint of DeKoski. But then the conversation is, but if it's worth $2 million, do we leverage that and move to, a cheaper piece of property or something? I mean, so those are the conversations that I think whatever I called it, the facility or property kind of potential work group might do, because those are all complicated questions.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to find, if we had to purchase a piece of property, we wouldn't be able to find it affordably as what we already owe basically nothing on.
Right.
Well,
So,
we have property and we have quite a chunk of property that
Right.
we're not using.
Right.
And Deweese has property that he might part with. We don't know that either. And there's a property right next door. I think the thing with consolidating, we have to consolidate all together, because part of the problem is they're not physically on site.
Right.
We're on the same property, they are physically on site.
So for instance, at Detox, we tried to get away with having a counselor, you have to be on site. And so when Paula was the manager, she had a credential that sort of allowed us to fudge that. Well, that's the kind of stuff we've been doing all along that really isn't, I mean, we've done it because it was a cost benefit analysis and we didn't feel like there was a lot of risk there, but we could have gotten cited for that, for instance. I mean, that's a small issue, but it just goes again to speak to the geographic segregation is just challenging.
I have to step away, but I appreciate all the hard work that you just put together, Chris. That was great. And I think that we've got a great team, and we're going to move forward, I think, in a real positive way. These are things that needed to happen, and it's sometimes the growth is tough, but it's gonna be great when we get done. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, Chris, I thought it came together really nicely. I think the thing that stood out to me the most is we talk about the cadence. I thought you did a great job of kind of teeing it up, crisis management, long-term strategy, and how the crisis management and the decisions that are being made because of crisis, out of necessity or whatever, and how they might impact long-term strategy. I think when we look at the financials, and the financials are to a place where we're talking months instead of years, that's when we need to have these frequent touch bases, because that just says that the cadence in which change needs to happen is faster. When you have years of financial, like, you know, or greater than a year or whatever it might be, I don't know what the expected thing is. I think that's when you know, it's kind of like business as usual. But I think for the fact that you were able to kind of highlight, hey, here's the day. Like, if things don't change, this is it right here. And it's less than a year. I think what did you have? Like, do you have like 9 months, 10 months?
June, yeah.
Yeah.
Next year.
So that says, you know, and you don't know until you don't know. I mean,
Right.
but you know, moving forward, I think it's important to have these weekly touch bases, because in essence, it feels as though, like, to make a decision that is going to need board support, or that you think needs board support, you know, just because it kind of potentially alters or changes maybe long-term strategies or impacts long-term strategies, for instance, those decisions are going to have to happen more frequently than every month. You know what I mean? Instead of like, hey, let's talk, because, you know, I'm a kind of person who like needs to hear it, then I got to take a week to think about it, then I got to, or a day or whatever,
Right.
unless it's like a safety decision. I mean, a lot of people function like that. So we don't want to like have a decision that goes to the board, everyone think about it, come back at another month. At that point, we've already ate away at 20% of the opportunity before, you know, whatever decision day or whatever you want to call it. So I think that these weekly touch bases really kind of help. Like I said, I really appreciate it. It's just an opportunity to know where we're at. Because you know, bad is bad. Bad is subjective. Busy is subjective. But this was really clear cut and dry. And I thought that your estimate around the property values was really great too, just so that, you know, it's like, well, they're worth a lot of money. Well, what does that really mean? A lot is a lot to a lot of different people, but it does show very objectively that, you know, we're even though it may be a challenging position, I would tell you right now, there are a lot of people that would do anything to be put in this position.
They have $6 million worth of property.
You know, there are hospitals that I know of that have 6 days cash on hand, that if operations exist, you know, quit, they would not be able to make the next payroll. That's a real thing in healthcare. So I do think that why, you know, it does look a certain way, the fact that we're on it now and not in April of next year is really great. And the fact that we're having these proactive conversations is super important, because it'll allow us, it gives some breathing space to make a decision that's not necessarily reactive, and strategic at the same time. So I really appreciate it, Chris. I just can't say it enough. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, this
And
helps
we did talk about, you know, there's what, 3 different focuses we have, and maybe setting up committees for each focus, because people have different expertises, and the bigger the group, the harder it is to
right.
really get down to brass tacks, and just focusing on some smaller committees for each one of those 3 pillars Chris gave.
What I would propose is that to meet next week, and it sounds like Wednesday could work for folks, that I kind of flush out those 3, like, what's the work actually look like. And I just noticed, I'm sorry, Rich, is that a hand up?
Yeah,
Okay, I apologize. I just saw that now. Go ahead.
focused on things. I know that detox used to be in residential. So on the consolidation, why did it move out in the first place? Or the second time, I guess, actually.
Excuse me. And let's see, Mark goes back to those days. That was probably the most savvy financial move we ever made, because we were in a similar situation as we are now. But what we're finding now, because we were able to sort of double down, it was a 6-bed unit only. But we were turning folks away like crazy. Oh, Margaret this happened in your time too, right, Margaret? Yeah. And so we figured that if we could double that, that we weren't meeting the community need. So there was that, but financially then, once we build it, they showed up, and we actually did sell because the construction cost was way under bid. We did end up having to sell a recovery home to sort of finish that project. But like Dave has said, that's carried the agency. That move has got us to now. But as Paula said, we were probably overplaying that card without even really realizing it. And that's maybe a whole nother discussion to have, but that's part of the reason why we don't think it's going to go back. So there is a discussion around that kind of consolidation. Maybe it goes back there temporarily. I don't think that's where we're headed now. If that, we think we have another plan for the short term, but that's why it moved, because we were not meeting the community need. We're saying no to too many people, and we had a pretty safe assumption based on the financials that would pay for itself, and it ended up paying for itself within a year. And then it's been what's kept the agency afloat since then.
Okay,
But
thank you.
again, at the time, we didn't address all these other things that we could have. We just said, whew, okay, now we can breathe. And that's what we've done. Not that it's not like our margins were huge or anything. I mean, we just kept the agency kind of band-aided together during that. Instead of having
And staffing wasn't really a problem back in that
That's true too.
model.
That's true too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. That's the important question. So my thought, well, I don't know how to move I had a lot of like sleepless nights in the last week, not only about the situation, but just about how to have a conversation and how to do this work with the board. And so, I want to kind of move in that direction is to, have you all be a meaningful part of the conversation, because this is just bigger than this leadership team. And so I want to do whatever makes sense. And so I tried to tee up some framework. I think the biggest framework is, again, as we keep dissecting it, is around the properties. I think, and I think, the advocacy and fund development are parallel processes, to be sure. But I don't think that fundraising or fund development or grant writing is going to be enough to sort of get us whole in the long term.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I think those are strategies that are long, like even if we weren't in crisis mode, those strategies should still exist. You know what I mean? Those are
Right.
just forever strategies. The property discussion is more of a short-term strategy with long-term potential and opportunity. So for me, I think, like I said, I think you did a great job. I think based off the way the financials are structured, for me, I think having purposeful, meaningful touch bases every single week is important, so things don't get lost. Everybody's in the loop, and that if decisions need to be made, at least it's happening real time, or at worst, it's carried over for the next week. So let's say let's say tomorrow you are like, we're selling the property, right? We talk about it next week, and then if there's still some uncertainty about it, at least it's only carried out the decision only takes 2 weeks instead of 2 months to make. And so as you make decisions that I think are, crisis management and operational and everything else, which I think is excellent, I think if there's decisions that you have concern that could potentially impact the long-term strategy, the name change was another one, right? That's another one that kind of has like an
I
impact,
didn't
right?
even bring that up, but
I know, but if you're like tomorrow, like we're changing the name, right? It's like, at least you can get a decision sooner than
Right.
later, right?
Right.
So I think that, and I don't want to, like, just from a board perspective, and I hope the other board members, if I'm off base, I mean, we haven't obviously talked about this, just jump in, but if there's like, hey, this is what we're working on, here's our work in progress, and here's what we've completed, and just a touch base on that, and it goes real fast. And then if you feel like, hey, I need board support or board decision, or the board says, hey, you know what, changing the name, I think that has an impact on the long-term strategy. Let's talk about it a little bit. And maybe we don't, but at least you can get quick. I mean, you and I meet every week, but I'm
Right.
not, I'm just a guy. I think that having everyone else involved, is great if they can be involved. And I think that there's a purposeful place and an opportunity for those discussions to be had if needed. And that way it can happen quick. And I think that the cadence is driven off the financials saying, hey, we're less than 10 months away at our current rate. Now, once that gets out to however many months, let's say it's 15 months or whatever it might be, whatever the decision is, then we can scale it back because there's not so much a sense of urgency and we can start having maybe monthly conversations. That would be my take on it. But I'm obviously, like I said, I'm just here. So whatever you guys think, I'm good with.
Dave, I see your lips moving. I think you're talking.
Yeah, I'm talking.
Okay.
Chris's idea of trying to find a developer that Chris could give him that list of properties and say, okay, we want to build a facility and we want to keep those operational till that facility's built, and then those properties become yours. I think that, I mean, developers are pretty into making a good deal, and I think it would be a good deal for both parties, because those are prime properties for developers.
So what I would propose, yeah, and I, if the board is comfortable, so, because some of this is, we have to manage what's in the community too. Mark, is your hand up again?
Yeah, but why don't you
Okay,
finish?
okay. I don't want to get ahead. So, at some point that we move forward and I start having conversations, we all need to have a collective understanding of what's happening, and we all need to be on the same page. And so I feel like that here's the vibe I'm getting, is that you all are comfortable with us, leadership team, probably primarily me, starting to have some conversations around property, around fund development, and start putting some thoughts there, and around advocacy. And so my proposal would be then next week to kind of lay out, this is where I think I'm going to go, and kind of give an update there, and get your feed on that, or get your feedback on that. And then just kind of keep doing that, to Jeremy's point, kind of weekly, because some of this is slow moving. Like takes days to get calls back, or you're setting up appointments with realtors, or however. I mean, I don't know how. I'm scared to death of the next year, professionally. I mean, I got to say, but I also, part of the reason I put some memes and stuff in the PowerPoint is this is also, I hope, exciting. I mean, just because I'm turned up inside with angst right now, there's also excitement, I think, that for this community and for this agency, that we can do something really cool and special, and that this doesn't have to be a heavy crisis-driven project. We'll get you out of this crisis, I promise you, if you all can kind of stick with us in what will be a messy, hey, what about this, and exploring different ideas that I mean, we just don't know how this plays out. So But I feel like I've got some permission to move forward with at least a template of next steps to present next week. Is that,
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think all options are on the board. So whatever
Okay.
you put out there, all ideas are good ideas when you're down to the
okay,
10-month mark, right?
yeah.
So
just,
I think
know,
anything I think in my eyes, everyone supports the operational decisions you make. And we want to support when we support all of your ideas, and we want to make sure that we all support whatever whatever conclusion you come up with. Because you may go out and say, hey, I talked to some developers and they said that this is a terrible idea. I don't know. I don't work in construction, so I have no idea. I mean, I'm just making assumptions, but
yeah.
I think all options are on the table. I think all ideas are on the table. And I think that you have all the autonomy in the world to explore everything. And then in my eyes, whatever decisions that are made, if you think they're going to impact the ability to be around 10, 15, 50, 100 years from now, that we just want to make sure that we're all aligned.
Right.
Because the community will ask, like, well, what is ATS doing? Like, what's going
That's
on?
what
Like,
I mean. I mean,
why are they buying this? What are they doing? The staff last too, obviously. So I think, having as much of
exactly.
to be able to
So that's what I mean
form
about
that.
us being in sync, and why I think it's important, at least at the front end of this, until we really have a more clear direction, that you all kind of stay informed, meaning that's my job, is to, hey, this is the conversation I had, this is what we're thinking now, here's what we had to do operationally, and just sort of keep everybody on page. Even though we'd have no idea what it's going to be. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just thinking along that line, for some of these decisions, I think we need a quorum of the board. And
what we're not talking about is me signing anything.
No, I know. What I was
okay.
saying, because we're in a crisis situation, can we look at lowering the percentage or number of board members that are at a meeting to constitute a quorum if we have to take action?
Well, and I think that, what I think is that I wouldn't want to lower it. I think that's,
Okay.
but I do think we say, listen, we need to make a decision next week.
Yeah.
Chris presented something. We didn't have enough people to make a decision. A decision needs to be made next week. Or do we turn around and make it virtually? I mean, that's another option. But I think that because of the frequency of the meetings, we can turn around and say, listen, like you need to be here.
That's good. That's a good point, Mark. We'll keep an eye on
Well,
that.
but I think Jeremy's covered that by their other options rather than lowering it. So good idea.
Yep. I think so. It's a good thing to keep in mind. But yeah, to be clear, that you're not given any permission to go buy properties or sell properties or anything like that.
I knew that, but I thought we were going to change the name.
Yeah, you're not giving me that permission either. Otherwise, we would have done that a long time ago. Yeah. So, okay, well, I think just in honor of your time, then, unless there's more questions, I think I hear my word is by next Wednesday to have an agenda and to do a presentation. Well, I'll have an agenda by Tuesday, and then on Wednesday have a presentation of kind of, here's what I'm thinking, here's the calls I think I'm gonna make, and here's what I think we ought to do around, some fund development ideas or thoughts. I'll just kind of move into that kind of headspace in the next week.
So then the next meeting is Wednesday
I say
or Tuesday?
Wednesday. I
Wednesday.
think. Is it?
Yep.
I know I got a
I think it'll always be impossible in summer in northern Michigan to align everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think being flexible, I think we just do the best we can. So
and just to be clear, Andy Cole made that request to be so, and if everyone else can make it, I mean, I think he's going to add value to the conversation. So
100% agree.
All right. Well, thank you all. I know this wasn't expected, so I appreciate your time being here. We'll send this recording to I'm not sure where we'll post it, but we'll let you know. I'm not sure if Maggie had a thought or plan, but it'll post it for those that weren't here. So,
Excellent.
all right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
All right,
Well,
take care.